Hey, Cody, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Jay, how's it going, man?
Pretty good, pretty good. How was your family and things going with everything going on with COVID-19?
Been good. In terms of work life, obviously, I've not had too much to talk about. I've really had to struggle to find sporting events to talk about. So I've definitely went a few new paths, learned about a lot new things. But in terms of local and family life, everything's been real good. I'm actually I guess someone I found out I've been living quarantine life for the past 4 or 5 years. So not too much has changed for me.
Doesn't seem like it.
No.
Doesn't seem like it. Did your family watch The Last Dance with you?
My wife did. My wife was she's become me and my wife are both big documentary people. So
Okay.
we can really watch documentaries about pretty much anything. So, I don't think when we first met, she was really a big sports fan, but through documentaries and different things, she's become one. So now all of a sudden she's a big Michael Jordan fan too. So yeah, she watched all of it with me.
Nice. So she watched like all 10 episodes every single night, every Sunday night. It's kind of like a little date night for you guys.
Yeah. Even stayed up way past their bedtime each night to watch it.
I love it. I love that. What were your thoughts, like general observation after watching everything, after all 10 episodes? What was kind of your thought about the whole documentary, docuseries, things like that?
Honestly, and again, I've watched a ton. I love documentaries, even if it's stuff that I'm not really interested in. It's always cool to get an inside things, especially when it's almost like documentaries where you get to hear so many different people's opinions. I thought it was one of the most well put together things I've ever watched. And for someone who obviously grew up idolizing Michael Jordan, but not so much in terms of getting to watch him play live. By the time I really started watching basketball on a nightly basis, he was a Washington Wizard. So, I just didn't really have that full feel of how good he was and how good Chicago was. So I've done a lot of research over the years and, pretty much felt like I grew up with it. But then getting to watch this really has a whole new spin on, with this day and age of social media, you always sit back and think, well, there wasn't drama back in the day. And obviously that was not true.
Not at all.
So that was cool to see of how many things happened and how it wasn't, when you look back on certain eras, you think things are perfect. You thought the Chicago team was perfect, and to realize how many things were happening, and yet they were still winning 6 championships over such a small amount of time. I thought it was well put together. There's very limited things that could captivate an audience for 10 hours, especially when you break it up into, a month and a week. And I felt like it was one of those things where every time it ended, I felt myself wanting more, even to episode 10. I'm so ready for Wednesday to get to watch, the rebroadcast of Game 6. Because again, I actually think I watched that, but I don't remember it and I didn't, follow it. So I'm so excited to actually watch a good 90s basketball game in its entirety, because that'll be something new to me and something definitely new to my wife, who's never watched. She's only seen the new age of basketball, so she's going to be blown away by watching defense in a basketball game, I'm sure. So I look forward to that. I'm ready. I want more. I still feel like I put on Twitter, like I want to know about his time with the Wizards. I want to know about him running Charlotte and how all those things have happened. I want more. And that's crazy. After 10 hours wanting more, that just shows how well put together the documentary was and how interesting all of it was to learn.
Oh, very interesting, very insightful. We got a lot of information. But I think one thing that when I was thinking about this after watching last night's episode 9 and 10, they talked about Jerry Krause in such a negative light, but he doesn't get credit for orchestrating 2 three-peats. And if you look at the three-peat, the first three-peat, 91 and 93, and then going from 96, 97, 98, even though he had bad people skills, even though he wasn't a personable person, even though, Cody, he wasn't the guy that you would want to hang out with and have a drink with or go to a game with or just hang out and invite him over to your house because he had horrible people skills, that man, when it came to being a general manager and orchestrating a team, Cody, he did that in a phenomenal way.
Oh, yeah. And I think when I think of great teams, I think if you did a documentary like this, every single general manager, if you think, say in, 10 years, we get a New England Patriot documentary, Robert Kraft will look like a huge villain in that whole show. So I think it would almost be, even in Golden State, people are going to look at Bob Myers. Oh, well, you weren't really a good general manager. You hadn't got Kevin Durant. So I really think that, he got painted in negative light, but I think most general managers would in that scenario. I loved in episode 10 where finally Scottie Pippen, who really had the most disdain for him than anyone, actually said, if Michael Jordan's the best player and Phil Jackson's the best coach, then how can you not say Jerry Krause is the best general manager? And look, he did some amazing things and he did some risky things that it almost, besides not going for the 7th title, everything he did worked. Getting Tony Kukoc, everyone hated that he was so in on him. He's one of the most underrated players of all time, years before his time. Even Kevin Durant said that was one of the players he try to fasten his game after, which is crazy because, I mean, that's the best player in the world, saying that Tony Kukoc was one of his inspirations, to flip Will Perdue and make that Dennis Rodman. Such a massive change. And to recognize when players didn't fit. And that's the biggest thing in basketball, especially back in the early days. Even when you look at San Antonio didn't have a great group of players, but it was just puzzle pieces that fit. And with Chicago, they were puzzle pieces that fit. You wonder, if Scottie Pippen was on another team, how good would he have been looked at in the same light? Would he be better? Would he be worse? Same thing with any of those players. Dennis Rodman, played so well in that 97-98 season, played less than 50 games in the next 2 seasons and was done with the NBA. Nobody else would have him. And he wasn't really out of his prime. So, I mean, I think Jerry Krause, I agree with what Scottie Pippen said, that in terms of being one of the best general managers of all time, I think you got to give him credit. It's a shame he didn't go into the Hall of Fame sooner when he was still alive, because I think a lot of that was that he rubbed everybody the wrong way, especially people in the hierarchy along with him. And I think now looking back, while he was painted in a negative light in terms of how people got along with him, I think it's crazy to fathom that he's not one of the greatest basketball minds and basketball general managers of all time, with just, if nothing else, his ability to find talent and make it work with the group he had.
Correct. And I think when thinking about Jerry Krause, people think, oh, he found Michael Jordan. He didn't find Michael Jordan. Jordan was already there before Jerry Krause got the job. But when Jordan and the team, my personal feelings here, I don't like the way that he courted Phil Jackson to take over for Doug Collins. I don't like the way that he courted Tim Floyd to take over for Phil Jackson. But if you go back to that point, he saw something in Phil Jackson. He saw something in Kukoc. He saw something in Rodman. And honestly, you have to give credit to Phil Jackson as well, because Phil Jackson had to somehow orchestrate all these personalities to be one piece, one unit, one well-oiled machine. And when you think about, when you watch these teams, they could have gone way more in depth into that Supersonic series in 96, the 98 series between the Jazz, and talked about how grueling mentally those series were, because you mentioned it earlier. Your wife's going to watch this game on Wednesday night and be like, wow, they're playing defense. And I think I heard a number earlier today saying that the Jazz didn't score more than 80 points in that 98 finals. Now, I don't know if that's specific and if that's accurate, but it does sure sound like it's accurate, because Jerry Krause found all these pieces. Phil Jackson, who somehow comes out of this looking like the best piece out of all of them, because, I mean, Jordan, he had issues, Pippen had issues, Robin had issues, but between Krause finding Phil and then Phil using his mind, Cody, to put these pieces together, this team for years, and you have a kid, I believe. I don't have any kids right now, but when I'm 50, 60, 70 years old, I can look back and say this Bull squad was definitely one of the best, because somehow they got all these guys to work so well together when they had such strong personalities.
Yeah, and that's what a dynasty is pieces of the puzzle. And so many people nowadays, we see so many one and done championships because you have great players especially in basketball nowadays. A great player almost on its own could win a championship. I mean, LeBron James is a perfect example of someone who is so skilled and so talented that really almost by himself, he can at least get to the finals. And I think in terms of building a dynasty, I mean, look, you take away everything that Michael Jordan had, I still think he wins at least one championship, because that's how good he was. But to win 6, it just shows that all the pieces were there, from always having, that key shooter. We even heard Steve Kerr talk about it. He wanted to be like John Paxson, because what John Paxson brought was that key role, always being ready, always ready to shoot when that ball hit his hand, no matter if it was for 2, for 3, down low, and play defense. Steve Kerr said, well, that led Chicago to 3 titles. Now I'm going to fill that role. Boom, there you go. You needed that defensive stopper. That's where Dennis Rodman came in. And even little pieces that they didn't talk a lot about. Bill Cartwright, what he brought to that team down low was so huge, because, the first three-peat was still almost a guard-dominated NBA, and it was shifting to these massive guys yes, like Karl Malone and Shaquille O'Neal and Shawn Kemp, and these guys who were dominating down low. And, Michael was getting beat up, so they needed someone down low who could at least just match that. And that was Dennis Rodman, Bill Cartwright all coming in. They had plenty of guys who could play different roles, and that was such a key to the Chicago Bull team. And, of course, Michael Jordan's greatest player of all time, no doubt. Without Michael Jordan, Chicago doesn't win any of those. But in terms of what a dynasty is, that's filling in all those key parts, and that's what Jerry Krause's role was, is making sure that all those boxes were checked to lead to the team being great. And so many other teams have had that over the years. And again, people have went crazy comparing dynasty to dynasty. And when you look at the Lakers in the early 2000s, late 90s, they did the same thing. It's all Kobe and Shaq. But, man, they had every box checked. They had a point guard who was a true point guard. Derek Fisher was always ready to shoot, but was the facilitator, ran that offense perfectly. They had Rick Fox who was taking big shots. So, again, you checked all the boxes. But then you get later into the game and you get to Golden State and you go, well, they weren't built for a dynasty. The first ever MVP for Golden State was Andre Iguodala. He was not a superstar at the time. He played his role so perfectly that people said, well, man, he's the MVP. And that's true. He was. And, back in the day, you almost wonder if the way we look at sports now, and when you think of MVP, maybe it wasn't Michael Jordan. Maybe it should have been John Paxson once or Scottie Pippen once. But at the time, you just couldn't ignore how big Michael Jordan was. So you always gave him the MVP. But, that's how you build a dynasty in any sport. You have to have those key skill players that, don't make the front page of the newspapers and don't lead off Sports Center and all those things. But that's how you keep winning. And the guys who aren't making the big money either. Michael Jordan made a great point last night when talking about going for, a 7th title, that those guys would have all signed 1-year deals because to them it wasn't me, it was we. And he felt like they were all on the same page and they would have all taken pay cuts, not went for the big money in free agency or the new opportunity to be the guy, and would have taken that opportunity to do something that no one's ever done. And it just didn't happen.
Yeah, man. You're talking about the way that the dynasty can be orchestrated and how dynasties are built. Think about the Bulls, 96 to 98, without Ron Harper. Think about that squad without a Judd Bushler, who you may say, there may be people listening to this saying, who is that guy? Well, without him, I don't know how far they go. Luke Longley, a guy that wasn't really talked about very much in this documentary, but they had all the pieces. And I forget if it was Reggie Miller, if it was Rick Smits, one of the Davis boys from the Pacers. I forget. But somebody was talking about how massive and how much girth he had down low and talking about how you got Dennis Rodman guarding basically the best low post guy. Well, Luke Longley's guarding somebody else, either 4 or 5. You mentioned it. These guys were huge. These guys, they're not the build of today's NBA and today's athlete. These guys were massive. You have Dennis Rodman guarding one, Luke Longley guarding one. He's kind of like Andrew Bogut. He's there, but he knows his role. He knows exactly what he's doing. And the Ron Harper thing to me is very, very interesting because early on in Ron Harper's career, and you know this very well, was a 20-point-a-game guy. I mean, right. he was a slasher. And then he had his knee injuries. And that's one thing that I like about him. Jumpers, they have issues with their knees from jumping so much, and there are injuries that come because of that. And he is one of those guys as well that's a jumper, a leaper, had injuries to his knees. He was able to transform Andre Iguodala, you mentioned, able to transform his game, transform his career to be a better version of himself. And he basically found himself in the right situation. And Ron Harper, think about it. You got 6'6" Ron Harper, 6'6" Mike, and then you got 6'8", 6'9" Scottie Pippen, guarding 1 through 3. And people wonder, what would they do today? They're going to pick you up at the other end of the court and force you to get an 8-second in today's basketball because they're not letting you get the ball up. And that's one thing about that Jazz series that I really wish they pinpointed and talked about more because I love defense so much because, man, that Ron Harper addition, Cody, was so big to their success.
Oh, yeah. And, again – when you come to a team like that, you take that step back. And for Ron Harper to do that, it's something, again, you don't see a lot in today's sports is guys who, who knows? Ron Harper, I mean, if you just think of guys in their athletic minds, it's hard to say, well, I'm not going to be the guy anymore. I'm not going to be the superstar. I'm going to kind of fill that role. But that's what they all did. And, I mean, all those names, guys like Luke Longley, even Bill Wellington and Scotty Burrell, guys who didn't play a lot of minutes sometimes, when they came in, they did what they were supposed to do. And that was one of the key things for Chicago is whether you play 48 minutes or you play 3 minutes, when you're on the floor, you got to do something for us. And a lot of times it wasn't scoring, is rebounding. It was defending. It was making sure that the guy, a guy is working. Someone is staying busy. So Michael and Scotty could be productive on the offensive end. But really, one of the most notable guys in all that is Scottie Pippen himself. I mean, a guy who was a superstar. I mean, you could argue, looking at all the tape, looking at all the numbers, that he was a top 10 NBA player in history.
Yes.
Yet he'll always just get the look at he was Robin to Michael Jordan's Batman. But it was a guy who was so fine. I don't want to say he was fine with the role, but he wanted to win. They were winning. He wanted to be successful. Now, towards the end of that run, he said, look, man, I'm massively underpaid. And that's 110% true. He was by far maybe the most underpaid player through 97, 98 in history of basketball. And, of course, that made good when he ended up going to Portland and everything. But at the end of the day, when you look at the dynasty aspect of it, that's what made them so good. And that's why you'll probably never see that again, because 6 championships nowadays is so crazy. I mean, you got to think, Michael left for a couple of years, but nonetheless, 6 years, 6 championships is so crazy because there's going to be at least 1 or 2 players that look at free agency, look at the opportunity to be the guy, and someone's going to go. And that's how it's going to be probably, I would say, for here on out, to be honest. I just don't see another team ever being able to replicate, winning 6 titles altogether. I mean, if you even jump sports to go to the NFL, what New England has done is so crazy, but that's because really they fill voids. Even when one player will leave, they would fill it right back up. And that's much harder to do in a sport like the NBA where there's so many, gyms and busts everywhere where, Chicago went through a rebuilding stage. I was looking today because I was just trying to figure out, because I remember so many big name guys coming to Chicago and not working. Again, Jerry Krause put together an amazing group of young guys and just they never panned out. And then he traded some guys that would just boom right when they left. I mean, it was almost like all that good, I don't want to say luck, but all the things that worked out so well for him in the Michael Jordan era didn't. I mean, Jay Williams, I'm a big Duke fan, as you can see. I thought Jay Williams coming out of college was going to be one of the greatest point guards in NBA history. And maybe he would have been, but a motorcycle accident derailed all that. I mean, that's something Chicago can't control. So then they lose what was a top 5 pick. So, going all the way back to we were talking about Jerry Krause, I think he doesn't get enough credit for the amount of talent he drafted and brought in because those guys were all so hype. And I mean, I think he had Eddie Curry and one other player that he wanted to make, a dynamic duo. And if you look at just the tape of those guys before they got to Chicago, I see it. I mean, he brought in the best scouted young talent, and unfortunately, none of them just worked. So, going back from, looking at the guys who filled in the roles all the way back to Jerry Krause, Chicago is just one of those teams that was so great and then had so much potential. The potential, even to this day, just never seemed to click again.
Going a little different route than the Jerry Krause situation, were you a wrestling fan growing up?
Oh, yeah.
So do you remember the NWO situation where Dennis Rodman went in and left after Game 3 to go hang out with Hulk Hogan? Do you remember that?
I remember, and I even remember ordering the pay-per-view because I was so hyped to see Dennis Rodman and Karl Malone wrestle because what they were building was a tag team main event. I don't remember what pay-per-view it was. I was a big wrestling fan, by the way. I mean, a big one. And
I had a feeling you were.
Yeah, and I remember they were building towards like a pay-per-view, and it was Hollywood Hogan and Diamond Dallas Page, and they each got one partner. And, of course, Hogan went Dennis Rodman. So it was a secret because, Karl Malone was not running around in Las Vegas during the finals. He was focused. But right after the finals ended, Karl Malone ended up being the secret partner of Diamond Dallas Page. So them two actually got in the ring together, which is crazy because, you see them actually falling down to the floor and playfully kind of going back and forth there in the finals. And they end up sort of wrestling each other at the pay-per-view. So, yeah, I remember that vividly because that was that was a crazy moment. I mean, he came out years before that with the NWO or a year before that with the NWO in Chicago. And that was crazy, but no one expected to see him during the finals, not even his teammates and his coach.
So let's think about this now. Not trying to compare. Let me take that away. Trying to view what that situation was, the NWO, Hulk Hogan. Oh, Game 3, I'm not going to be there. I have something to do the very next day. It's away from the team during the finals. Imagine that happening today. Oh, I don't know. Okay, I'll give you a great example. The Warriors and Cavs, you can pick any year that they played against each other. Draymond Green says, I'm going to be away. I got an appearance. Y'all don't know about it. I show up. After it all happens, after y'all see me on TV, or after y'all figure out where I was, social media, TMZ nowadays, man, it's crazy. They're going to find you somewhere. Imagine that happening today. Please, in your own words, explain how you think that would be viewed by the public.
By the public? Oh, I know. You would get flamed. You would get absolutely flamed, which, I mean, Dennis Rodman did too. I mean, there wasn't social media, but oh man, I guess at the time newspapers and ESPN and stuff, they flamed him for it. At the end of the day, though, the way you really look at it is it in the finals? And, sometimes when I think about this, I put myself in a coach's, a general manager's mindset where what do you do? Do you take a guy who is so productive and so important to your success and go, yeah, you can't do that? Or do you say, well, he came back from Las Vegas, but oh my goodness, he had a plus 22 plus a positive and negative effect on the team. So I don't even know. Now in terms of media, oh man, it would be crazy, especially if it was a player that was controversial like Dennis Rodman was, and it would not go over well today in the social media age. And again, you couldn't really sneak off. Dennis Rodman snuck off in a way because no one knew it was happening until he was there. Right. Nowadays, that would be a lot harder to do because all it would take was one person to spot you and go, hey, there's so-and-so. What are they doing here? So it would not be perceived well by the media. you wonder how an NBA team would handle that. But I'm sure nowadays contracts and stuff are a lot different where you are obligated to not do anything extraordinary. I know in terms of appearances and going back to wrestling, there's been tons of athletes who've made appearances on pro wrestling over the past or even in mixed martial arts shows, but they're not allowed to do anything. They're not even allowed to do an interview because per their contract, if you're in season, you can't do anything without it being fully approved by your team, your general manager. So I'm sure that might even be like a Dennis Rodman claim in the contract where everyone has that now if you're probably anybody. So, I'm sure then the contracts were a lot simpler where as long as you were at the game, we're okay.
Yeah, this team, it's been very interesting for people. I think you and I are the same age, but people that are younger than us, the 15, the 20, maybe even 25-year-old middle-aged adults or mid-20 adults that didn't get to see Michael Jordan, didn't get to watch Michael Jordan, didn't get to know anything about this Bull squad, and all they know is Kobe and LeBron. Not anything against those two guys, Kobe in his own right, LeBron in his own right. Very, very talented, once-in-a-lifetime generational type of talents. But Michael Jordan is different. How do you think that the younger people, especially, gosh, you got probably kids 10, 8, 9 years old, dad letting them stay up. Hey, come watch this. Y'all going to learn something tonight. Y'all going to learn about the best player of all time, and dad's going to go off about Mike. Michael Jordan to young guys, honestly, Cody, he's a different kind of cat because we see Michael Jordan. You think about a guy right now punching somebody in a practice. It's all over ESPN. It's all over TMZ. What are you fighting for? I played football in high school. We got in fights in practice. Nobody cared. Nobody did anything. It was kind of like a thing that you did 2 days during the dead heat of summer in August. You fight. It's not a big deal. But you got to see the fight of Michael Jordan. You got to see the intimidation of Michael Jordan. The Michael Jordan telling Reggie Miller to call him Black Jesus. That Michael Jordan. The Michael Jordan that no matter the moment, no matter what was going on the court, Michael Jordan is going to show up no matter what. I think a lot of young people nowadays, especially those that fall into the trap of only knowing what they know. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. Because when I was younger, I only knew what I knew, and I didn't have the internet to go back and watch YouTube and watch and read different articles that came out 15, 20 years ago to see things that happened. But the younger generation, not just Michael, but just that whole Bulls in the 90s basketball, they're getting to see, Cody, how hard it is and possibly how much someone's going to hate me for saying this, possibly how much easier it is now due to the technology and how advanced we are with health and medicals and things like that. When it comes to the younger generation, how, if you were, say, 10 years old, would you look at Michael Jordan now versus how you did back then? I know I'm asking you to use your brain imagination. I know quarantine may have your brain a little off because it has everybody a little odd right now. But just imagine, go back to 10-year-old Cody. How would 10-year-old Cody view Michael Jordan if he didn't know anything about him before?
I think I would have been blown away just by watching the clip, and especially with how different the game was. I mean, if you are a teenager now and maybe just now starting to develop some basketball skill in the way you play the game. I mean, what's the first thing? I mean, I've coached 7 and 8-year-olds and then 10 and 11-year-olds and 11 and 12-year-olds. I've coached that age group a lot. So one of the first things they want to do is shoot threes. And that used to, I remember being 10. I remember being that age and wanting to shoot fadeaway jumpers. I wanted to back down in the paint and fade away. And I wanted to shoot runners, and I wanted to try switching hands in midair on my layups because that was what Michael Jordan was doing. And now everyone wants to see how far they can shoot it, even if they cannot shoot it, even if they can barely hit the rim, they're like, oh, watch this for three, and it hits nothing. So the game has changed so much. So I think if people who are being introduced to Michael Jordan are also being introduced to a whole new, I mean, it's literally almost a new sport, the basketball that's been on TV. I mean, I hope there's a lot of everyone from 8-year-olds to people about to go play in college, about to play high school ball, or currently playing high school and college ball, really watch the game on Wednesday so they could see that there's no plays off. There's no such thing as a run out. If a guy gets a steal at the 3-point line, they don't just go, oh, well, he got it, we're going to let him score, we're going to go switch it up. I really hope that people will watch the way the game's played and how, they have full court man-to-man defense, even if it's just point guard on point guard the whole way up the floor, how John Stockton wouldn't let guys breathe, and how the entire game from, the 11-minute, 58-second mark right after the tip-off to the final minute, how Karl Malone and Dennis Rodman are going at it, how they're battling for position. There's nothing lazy. I look forward to seeing that because, to a lot of people, that's going to be a version of the sport they have never seen before. And I'm not one of those people who's going to trash today's basketball. I'm a huge basketball fan, so I love the game so much that any sport has to adapt. And basketball it's adapted to a whole new level game where it's less physical. Guys are more athletic. Guys are bigger. Guys do things you've never seen before. And therefore that attracts a new level of fandom where now you could argue that, basketball is maybe the most popular sport in America. I'd still say football is a little bit above it, but nonetheless, basketball and football have both destroyed baseball over the last 10 years. And that's because of the notable names in the NBA, guys like LeBron James, guys like Kobe Bryant. But I think there's a young group, and especially myself, if all I knew was today's basketball, I would be shell-shocked to see what I've seen on this documentary where, it was each game felt important, where each possession felt important, where guys were playing 44 to 48 minutes a game. That's absurd. We don't see that anymore. I mean, I guess James Harden has led the NBA in minutes, I think, over the past few years, and he's barely getting 40 minutes a game. Yeah. And that's just because Houston plays small ball. I mean, if they had a normal team, he would play less. So when you think about that, Jordan consistently, in blowouts even, was still playing 38 to 40 minutes a game. And if it was a close matchup, he was playing the whole game. Him and Scotty both were playing the whole game. Again, it's so different. And I think to a lot of people, they will adapt. I hope some people see that and change their game a little bit where, man, it'd be awesome to see things like mid-range jump shots come back, to see, runners make a little bit of a comeback where it doesn't always have to be guys trying to dunk on people, because, I mean, we just see a lot of either just bad plays, bad possessions now, or you see guys get hurt because they try to do things that are crazy and acrobatic. And of course you see the cool ones on SportsCenter. What you don't see is the abundance of torn ACLs and MCLs and guys getting hurt every single season. I mean, it's crazy that we are in the day and age of playing 34 to 36 minutes a game and only playing about 70 games per season for notable players. Yet there's more injuries in today's NBA than by far back in the late 90s. And I think you could credit that to guys doing things nowadays that just really shouldn't be humanly possible.
Very true. Very true. Let's think a little bit about the Dream Team. Going back, I think this was this is early on, 3 or 4 maybe, I'm not exactly sure. But the Dream Team, Isaiah Thomas didn't make it. Not a knock on his skills, just for the chemistry there. And for the players that were there on that squad, it sure seemed like that John Stockton being there, especially for the Karl Malone aspect. If you imagine Karl Malone there without John Stockton, you get a different Karl Malone, because that's his running mate. He played almost every season with John Stockton, so it makes a whole lot of sense. But that team put together, I don't know how you were when you were younger. I don't know how you were when you were thinking about and viewing the Dream Team 2, the 96 team. Let's be honest now. That 96 team had nothing on that 92 Dream Team. It was nothing even close. But that team put together, I think it's amazing that it took that early, I think it was Chuck Daly, the head coach, their early run with the college select team. I forget, sorry, my memory, I've been watching so much stuff lately, I forget what was on the docuseries, what wasn't. But I think you know what I'm talking about. When they had Chris Webber, Bobby Hurley, they all played the Dream Team. Chuck Daly was in there. Michael Jordan didn't really play that much. Then all of a sudden, they lose, and Chuck Daly says, okay, before the media comes in here, turn the scoreboard off. We're like, wait, excuse me? Like, what are you doing? But Chuck Daly knew something about that team, and then once that team was put together, it was literally a well-oiled machine. We all knew about Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan, when you pair him with Magic and Larry, it was, once again, him showing him, guys, Cody, this is my time. This is my league now. You guys had your time in the 80s. Michael ran the 90s. He already had his coming out party in 91, but 92 through the rest, nobody could touch Mike.
Yeah, and actually, I looked that up, and I meant to actually talk to my wife about that, because they didn't talk about the college select in the documentary, and I think that's because the Dream Team hates that story, because they say that the game was fixed. That's what they all say, but that's never been talked about or proven. That's what
just like the flu game. It was a flu game, not poison pizza. Right. It was all a different story.
So they didn't talk much about that. They talked about the big scrimmage in which Michael Jordan really just took over. But no, the Dream Team is one of those things where when you look at Isaiah Thomas, it was the 110% right decision. The team camaraderie, the team chemistry, it was already on shaky ground to begin because everyone was so competitive. It was. I think after a while, their competitive nature brought them all together, where they go, hey, wait a minute, we're about to all be teammates, man. This is going to be crazy. And it turns out, it was. So I think Isaiah Thomas being there with just the way that he played and that Detroit team played the game, it would have changed the aspect on that team. So I think you made a great point with Stockton and Malone. I mean, you almost think that's a package deal. When Karl went to LA, he was nowhere near the same Karl Malone. Sir. Granted, you could say he was older or whatever, but no, it was because he was not in that situation where he had one of the greatest point guards, one of the greatest true point guards of all time. As
and might I add real quick, Cody, not to cut you off, that's not a knock against Gary Payton, because Gary Payton was on that Lakers squad in 2004 when the Lakers lost to the Pistons.
Right.
That's not a knock on Gary Payton at all. Gary Payton, the glove, Mike can say whatever he wanted to say about the glove in that 96 series. The glove really did have a major impact on Mike in that series. But John Stockton and package deal, very well put. Those two guys together, it was a package deal, almost like a glove that fits your hand perfectly as soon as you put it on. And so, yes, he was out of his element. Gary Payton, great. But John Stockton and Karl Malone, that's why we say Stockton to Malone. It's always ingrained in our brains.
Right, and Gary Payton is a different type of point guard. I mean, if we're going to – I hate when people talk about greatest player of all time at each position because, man, I need more details. So, greatest defensive point guard of all time, boom, there you go with Gary Payton. Greatest passing point guard of all time, boom, you have John Stockton. So, imagine your running mate for 10, 15 years being a great passer, and then you're with a guy who's a great defensive player, but then more so maybe a scorer and a facilitator than he is a true find and open guy point guard. And then again, for Karl Malone, you're not going to be the first option or the second option playing alongside Kobe and Shaq. So he wasn't the same. But again, at the time of the Dream Team, they were a package deal. They were going to have chemistry when they're on the floor together. You know, they were going to be on the same unit, whether that was with the first team or maybe you're playing behind guys like Charles Barkley and them. You come on the second team. So your guys are getting rest, and here comes, you know, the second team for another country, and you're going to get John Stockton and Karl Malone. So that chemistry alone made them so tight. And I think after the inner squad scrimmages between Team USA, when, you know, Magic and MJ used to go at each other and Larry Bird was doing his thing, I think they all realized that, man, if we are able to form a unit of all of us being this competitive and we shift that to everyone else. I mean, you even heard them talking about, you know, playing against Tony Kukoc the first time and how they just kind of, you know, guys like Charles Barkley and Magic Johnson had nothing to do with Tony Kukoc, but Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen said, hey, we want to teach this kid a lesson. So they're like, sure, let's do it. So it was almost like you take that bully mentality that so many of those great players from the 90s had, form it into one big bully team. And I mean, my goodness, you know, you can make so many dynasty comparisons and player comparisons from then to today. There's not a team in the world ever that would have been able to really compete truly with the Dream Team, especially if you played under those rules. There's not a team in the world that could compete with that physicality and with that skill set. And at the end of the day, with that competitiveness, with that group of guys, it would have taken something amazing to really throw them off their game.
It would have taken something amazing. And I love that not just that team was put together at that time. I seriously love that the team knew who was in charge of the team, who the leader was. And Michael Jordan, his ego on the court, knowing that I am the man. I love the trash talk. You know, the behind the scenes we got to see in the locker room, or the white guy with the Jerry curl that was playing quarters. I mean, I love that behind the scenes stuff about Michael Jordan. It makes him fun, and I can only kind of imagine what kind of those card games, them playing poker at nighttime, or Charles Barkley and Mike going to play golf a little bit. I would love to see that camaraderie and that the team just coming together and being one well-oiled machine. And then also you have guys like Clyde Drexler, Chris Mullin. These guys are the guys on their team, and they say, hey, I don't care how good I am. This is Mike. This is Mike's team. And another thing about that summer that's very, very interesting, I know I'm going a little bit away from basketball now, but let's give Mike some credit. He knew that it was going to be time for him to leave basketball before he left basketball. And so in the summer of 92, before that Olympics, he went to his trainer and said, hey, I need to get my body ready for baseball. He's like, hold on, Mike, you're playing basketball. You have the Olympics coming up. What do you mean you're going to train for a different sport? Well, Mike was always looking ahead. People marvel about guys right now looking ahead, looking to the future. Mike had the foresight. Mike's like, hey, I know I'm going to connect for a three-peat. I know it's a little bit different. I can't really leave now. I can't really leave basketball now because the Olympics is here. I know I have to wait a little bit. But Mike had the foresight and the ability to look ahead and say, hey, I know coming up, it's going to be very, very soon. I'm going to be leaving basketball. I am mentally worn down. I am 29 years old. Mike retired for the first time at 30. And when he retired, he already had his next act lined up. And I'm like, hey, Mike, man, transfer some of that to us right now, some of the younger people, because we look at some of the guys now that retire. Andrew Luck, Patrick Willis. I'm not going to football now, but do they really have a plan? Or is it like a spur of the moment thing? We don't give Mike enough credit, Cody, for looking ahead and saying, hey, it's time for me to leave. And he left at the right time. It was unfortunate that he left when his dad passed away.
Right. And, you know, I think for some, and you mentioned a lot of NFL guys, I think it's almost admirable to retire when you're just kind of over it. You're just kind of done. There's no point for so many athletes, and we've seen this a lot in sports, way too much. Guys just play, and I think who Michael Jordan reference said, I think he said Patrick Ewing told him, I would be carried off the court. And Michael said, that's not going to be me.
Yeah.
And I think it's great for so many athletes to have that mindset. And you don't see that a lot nowadays because, Michael Jordan, I think one of the things to him was how competitive he was. I think he needed a break. But he knew himself well, and he said, "Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to sit at home though. So let's do something. Let's do something else. Let's go play baseball. It's a little bit, mentally less taxing, I would think. Probably playing. You're not always out there. You get a chance to be around a different group of teammates, and just a much different sport. And he got himself in shape. And look, you can make the argument that how an alternative universe would look if the baseball strike never happened, because there's a good chance. Michael would have got to play at least a few major league games, and how that would have changed the way he felt about baseball. Was he already growing tired of it then, or was he just starting to love it? Was he tired of being in the minors? If he would have got caught up to the White Sox, would it had changed his whole opinion? And he would have said, "Yeah, I'm going to have another good push at this and try to be on the big league team a whole year." We'll just never know. But I think Michael always had that foresight to where he didn't want to play when he wasn't going to be all in. And at the same time, he always knew that he was not going to be able just to relax, just to be able to sit at home, to just focus on anything else. So the first retirement, done with basketball, go to baseball. Second retirement, okay, we're going to relax a little, but we're going to start looking at being on the other side of basketball. When he left the Chicago Bulls the second time, he started talking to a lot of notable people on trying to figure out how he can become, a basketball operation guy, or even a general manager somewhere down the line. That used to be, he wanted to be a general manager for a long time. Turns out they were like, well, how about you come join the Wizards in a front office role? But, hey, we could use a really good shooting guard or small forward if you want to play a couple more years. There that was, and he got a chance to kind of get his toes wet there. Didn't work out, retired from basketball, but then knew he still wanted to have that inside role, was able to buy a stock in the Charlotte Bobcats at the time, and that's where he's been ever since. So I think he's one of those people which, I know people in my life that are very similar in terms of you just don't have the ability to say, I'm going to chill. I'm going to relax. I'm not going to do anything. To me personally, that's like my dream. My dream is to have nothing to do all day for like 300 days in a row. That's like my dream scenario. But for a lot of people, they need something to occupy their mind. They need something to always have their creative or competitive juices flowing. And if you don't, you don't feel good. You almost get depressed. You get in an odd state of mind where you feel like nothing. And I think Michael is one of those people where he just, you even heard him, episode 2, maybe even episode 3, where he talked about being hurt and how it was so mentally taxing on him to not be able to do anything, to not be able to play. And then they wanted to shut him down and he couldn't do it. Michael's a smart guy. And at the time, he may have not had the inside knowledge that he did years later, but it was the right move to sit out those final games and try to get a draft pick. That was the 100% right move. But in his mind, he needed to play. And it was competitive. It was him just, wanting to show the front office that we're not going to accept losing. It was all those things. I'm sure nowadays he looks at Charlotte and goes, if we lose these last 3 games, we may get a top 5 pick. Boom, we're losing these next 3 games. So I think in terms of, his mind and things, I think he's just one of those guys where he always has to have something to keep that mind and keep that competitive going. And you even mentioned, as far as on the plane rides, it never showed him sleeping on a plane or a bus. They were playing cards. They were smoking cigars. They were talking, playing quarters. This was not a guy who liked to just relax. And I think they made it very clear that once it got to the point where he couldn't even go out and do stuff, he couldn't even go out with his teammates. I don't know if you read anything on the Athletic. I subscribe to the Athletic. BJ Armstrong is writing articles for each episode, and he wrote a column saying in that last little stretch that when the Chicago Bulls team would go out to dinners and go out to movies and do stuff as a team, Michael Jordan couldn't come because people would somehow figure out where they were going and where they were going to be and swarm. So Michael couldn't go. He would have to be in his hotel room. He could never go out to dinner with them. He could never go to a movie with them. If they would make a public appearance or, just want to go to like a mall and just get a couple things while they were in a town for a night and they were, if they played a game or just stuck there for one more day, when they would go to these places, Michael couldn't come because people, even then, in the very early days of the internet, would figure out where he was and where they were going to be and would swarm the team and make it an unsafe environment. So, you got to just think that's not a life. We can envy his skill. You could even envy his financial status. I don't think there's anyone who would really envy that sort of lifestyle.
Not at all. Not at all. Speaking about somebody that didn't envy, not saying a lifestyle, but Michael Jordan, a guy named Reggie Miller, and a guy that people nowadays When you look at Reggie, he's a skinny guy. He's on TNT calling games with Kevin Harlan or Marv Albert, two of the best play-by-play men in the game. In that 98 Eastern Conference Finals, as a Pacers fan, we 100% believed we were taking down the Bulls. You may say, Jay, you're crazy. Why are you rocking your home team? Hey, no. If you go back and look at that, and Reggie Miller, Jalen Rose, and I wish, man, because I love Jalen Rose, I think he's a great personality. I wish they would have given Jalen Rose way more airtime to just get his thoughts out, because I love the way that he portrays his thoughts on the camera, or for the camera, that is. But, man, going into that, you had the Davis boys. You had Rick Smits. Say whatever you want about Rick Smits. He was a problem. Shaq didn't like going up against Rick Smits. When you look at the 2000 NBA Finals, yes, the Lakers won 4-2. But Rick Smits gave Shaq problems. Mm-hmm. There aren't many guys out there that gave Shaq problems, and Rick Smits was one of them. Mark Jackson, one of the best point guards to play in the NBA. Jalen Rose, Reggie Miller. It seemed like that was the team to take them down. But Michael Jordan, when it was needed, he got his team in the right position, and, of course, Steve Kerr had to hit another big shot, and the rest is history. That Eastern Conference Finals, what do you remember from that moment in your life?
Well, one of the big things about that Indiana team was they were built to beat Chicago. That was one of the key things. They had everything in place, from Mark Jackson to Reggie Miller to the size they acquired, where they could have guys go one-on-one down low with the likes of Dennis Rodman and Luke Longley and Scottie Pippen, and have a rotation. That was the big thing about Indiana. There was a good amount of teams that were, built to beat Chicago, even going back to the early Orlando Magic days, which I wish personally they talked more about the Orlando team, because they were built to beat Chicago.
Mike wasn't going to allow that.
No.
This was all Mike's doing. Yeah. He was not allowing that.
I told it to my wife too. I was like, you notice how he didn't mention Penny Hardaway's name once, because Penny Hardaway was one of the few guys that really did not have a lot of trouble against Michael Jordan. But that Indiana team was built for the matchup with Chicago. So I agree with you. I think looking back, Indiana probably maybe not should have been the favorite, because I think you would give Chicago the favorite based on what, Reggie Miller referred to as that championship pedigree. They knew how to deal with those situations. They knew how to win. And when you look at it, it's 100% true. I also think you got to factor in Larry Bird. And one of the crazy things is he's Larry Legend. He's one of the greatest of all times. But he was so new to coaching. You almost wonder how a different coach, a more experienced
coach, it was his first year as a head coach.
Yeah, and it was such a new experience for him. And even in terms of his emotion, where he was still thinking of things like a player. And in some aspects, that's good. But in other aspects, you're kind of like, oh man, you want to see. I just wonder how Indiana would have done if they had a more experienced coach. And all the credit in the world to Larry Bird. He's been great at almost everything he's ever done in terms of playing, coaching, and being an executive. But, I think Indiana was a team. And you see that a lot of teams that are built to beat almost one certain teams, in terms of, Miami, stacking up their team to beat San Antonio, and over the years, Detroit building up to make sure they have everything that they could go against the Lakers. And I think Indiana, more so than Utah had a squad, man. They were built so well. And I put on Twitter that Utah team, I don't even know. I really want to call it a dynasty. It's like a Utah Jazz dynasty that just never really won anything. But in terms of how well put together that team was with Jerry Sloan as coach, that's one of the greatest teams of all time, where you could pick them up and drop them in another era, and they probably win at least one title. It's just unfortunate that they had to continuously run into the Chicago Bulls. But I think Indiana was one of those teams where they had so many great pieces. They were built to match up with Chicago perfectly. But I think Reggie Miller, of course, Reggie Miller was very honest about his take on his skill level and about going against Michael Jordan. But I think he said one of the most honest things in the show was Chicago was not impossible to match up with, and not impossible to be competitive with, but no other team could match their championship pedigree, because
exactly.
no one else had won. No one else had winning experience against Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls, because they won all the time. So I think that was one of the biggest things. It's hard to overcome that. It's hard to beat a team that knows how to win and knows how to win on that stage.
Yes, and you're saying the Utah Jazz in your mind. I know you're joking around, but possibly not joking around, saying they're a dynasty. Hey, that could be the second one in the 90s, because the Buffalo Bills, 4 Super Bowls in a row. Yeah. And I don't know how you go to 4 in a row and lose, but they happen to do that. The Jazz, late 90s, ran into Michael Jordan. It was almost inevitable. Yeah. If you meet Mike in the finals, you're losing. Mm-hmm. And let me remind you guys, if Mike doesn't if Mike doesn't drive past Brian Russell for the layup, go to the other end and get a steal, we don't get the shot. there's a good chance that the Jazz do win that series. And so as much as it is, you say, oh, the Jazz just weren't that good. No. Go back and rewatch the series. Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo do a phenomenal job with Bill Simmons' podcast where they rewatch some of the Bulls series, and they're talking about things that the Bulls did and really just shining a light on, you mentioned the Magic, and Penny Hardaway, shining a light on some of the things that the Bulls did well, did perfect, and then some of the flaws and some of those athletes that kind of pushed them down. Imagine this. Imagine if Dennis Rodman didn't come. What do you think happens to the Bulls in the 95-96 series?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that was the thing that Chicago, and going all the way back to Jerry Krause, did so well. If he's seen a weakness, he was able to find a weakness in series they won. And, coming from a mixed martial arts and a fighting background, we always say, you learn so much more from a loss than a win. And sometimes you're blinded by success. And when you win, you say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Jerry Krause, one thing he did, and sometimes even got flamed for, was he would see them struggle. They would win, but they would struggle. And he'd fix it. He would say, we need this. We need more of a bruiser. We need a big guy down low. That's where Dennis Rodman came in. He thought they needed someone with more length, someone to kind of complement Scottie Pippen, where Scottie was really the long-armed guy. Everyone else was big and bulky. Boom. Let's go find a great European player. We found him. He was always able to find a piece they needed, which is hard to do when you're winning. He was able to do that. And, honestly, Jay, I think, and again, you'd have to do a ton of research for this, and I don't work for ESPN or their stats and stuff, but if you told me to sit down and put the 25 best NBA teams by season in history, I think you would be amazed to see how many teams are on the top 20 that didn't win NBA titles because of Michael Jordan. Some of those New York teams were great. That Orlando team was great. That Indiana team was great. That Utah Jazz team may be one of the top 10 best teams of all times, and how they were put together. They played as a unit, maybe better than any team in NBA history. They were always on the same page. They did not make mistakes. They all played defense. In terms of what Hornacek did and what Byron Russell did, and Karl Malone and John Stockton, always on the same page, coached by
Cody,
a legendary coach.
They remind me a lot of the 04 Pistons, 03-04 Pistons, because the way that team was put together, you think Ben Wallace, who was 6'7" maybe, guarding big guys, guarding centers, and they couldn't do anything with them. Very similar to the Jazz back then in that stretch in the 90s. You had teams that didn't want to play them at all, and you would look and say, Stockton, Hornacek, they get off the airplane, you're like, I'm guarding that guy.
Yeah.
I'm guarding him anyway. And when you say you're going to guard him, Stockton's like, okay, I ain't going to talk no trash. I'm going to be right there in your hip. I'm going to be picking your pocket. I want to make sure you score less than 5 points in the first half. And you're going to get a halftime thinking, that's a white boy. That's a white boy with short shorts. What is happening? But that's how they were together. A well-oiled machine.
Yeah, and at the time, a lot of people didn't consider Stockton and Karl Malone real big superstars because Utah was such a small market. Even as crazy as their fan base was, it was always a small market, and a lot of people still just thought, maybe Karl, and the fact that they never could get over that championship hump, that maybe they weren't superstar players. Same thing with Detroit. No one thought of Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton as superstars. People thought Rasheed Wallace as a character, didn't think of him as a superstar. People thought of Ben Wallace as a great defensive player, not as a superstar. But you put four players like that together, just like you put multiple big name players or multiple skilled players on Utah together, they make such good teams. And it just shows what Chicago had with that dynasty, where they were able to have a superstar, but so many key perfect role players that they could be maybe the best put together team in NBA history to never win a title. And I mean, I say, if you pick up that Utah team and you put them in 2001, 2002, you put them in 2003, 2004, I think they present so many problems to the great teams then that they could have, I want Stockton and Malone in their prime, not the late Stockton and Malone. I want them in their prime. I think they give a team like Detroit. I think they give a team like San Antonio fits. I think they were that good. They just couldn't overcome, again, a championship pedigree that Chicago and Michael Jordan really and Phil Jackson had.
The 90s basketball fan in me would have loved to have the scenario that you kind of put together. I'm just going to paint it a little different way. John Stockton versus Chauncey Billups. You have a Jeff Hornacek versus a Rip Hamilton. That would have been great. You have probably you're going to imagine Ben Wallace or Rasheed Wallace guarding Karl Malone.
Oh, yeah.
For a full game. Yeah. I mean, the fan in me, that's where I kind of fell in love with the NBA, that 90s basketball, and then you had that team there and that Pistons team. Sorry if you see my face, Cody. That Pistons team that really made me upset, pissed me off, because they made sure the Pacers, not just in the 04 year didn't win the finals, but the very next year they had to have a fan in the stands throw a cup at Ron Artest while he's laying on the scores table. They messed it up for me. I was watching that game at home, and all of a sudden I look up, wow, they're throwing a cup at Ron Artest, Steven Jackson. Then you got guys on the court. Hey, I wish Jermaine O'Neal would have connected a whole lot better, because that would have been comedy for the rest of my life. It's still comedy, but it can get even better. But that 04 Pistons team, even though they really pissed me off and get under my skin and get me upset because of how good the Pacers were. And the Pacers, and Reggie Miller will tell you, they believe that 04-05 year was their year, but the Pistons kind of messed things up. But if you put that Jazz team versus that Pistons team, where it's all about defense, all about a unit, all about being a well-oiled machine, and when you have a game where it's 75 points, maybe the high between a 6 or 7 game series, I love it. I'm pretty sure you love it. Oh, but yeah. A lot of people nowadays are like, why do you get so excited about that? Defensive basketball and a well-oiled machine. You don't have to give me a Kyrie, a KD to get me to watch. Give me defense. Give me guys that are playing hard. I love a defensive battle in football, Cody, and I love a defensive battle in basketball.
Oh, yeah, and it's one thing that Reggie Miller said in the documentary that we kind of chuckled at is he said that if we could score here, there was like 5 minutes and 30 seconds left, and we could score here, we could win. And nowadays, I mean, that is so absurd, because there's about a combined 29, 30 points scored in the last 5 minutes of any basketball game or any basketball quarter. But that's not how it was. And it was really it sounds odd, I know, but you'll understand this better than anybody. But it meant every point meant something. That was
every single second it meant something. If one wrong tip, if you tip the ball to the opponent instead of yourself, it meant so much in those games.
And that's something that's not there nowadays. I mean, nowadays, these guys let each other score really until the 4-minute mark, and then they're like, all right, let's play defense. And that's something that wasn't there then. So I agree. I think, that Utah and that Detroit team would be a dream matchup between two of the really most underrated teams ever, because you would have so many different things that maybe aren't the pretty style of basketball today, in terms of Rip Hamilton's off-ball movement, him getting open for shots, and Rasheed's physicality down low against Karl Malone's physicality, and which player that maybe we're not mentioning would step up and hit the shot, because both teams had very solid benches as well. So it would be such a fun series. And you have two of the greatest coaches of all time, with Larry Brown with Detroit, and then of course Jerry Sloan, another guy who's never really going to get his due of how good of a coach he was, because of the fact that he could never really get that team over that next hump. But in terms of not having any issues with guys on the bench, I mean, Karl Malone was a very unique personality, and it didn't show that in the show, where there was a lot of things going on with Karl Malone where he was almost, at times he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. John Stockton was very business approach, very on the forefront, but yet you never heard any rumblings about people being unhappy in Utah, which is crazy, because if a team nowadays in any sport loses much less 1 or 2 championship games, everything falls apart because people get upset and people blame somebody. There was never finger pointing in Utah. They always just, came back the next year even tougher. And that was from, 96, 97 and 97, 98. Just keep it all together, work harder. Let's do it again. And, that's something you don't see now. I mean, there's a lot of things. And again, you mentioned that question earlier, what a 10-year-old, what a younger person would see. Those are the things that really stand out to me, is how so many of these teams didn't cry wolf and go run off, play somewhere else. They went to the offseason and they got better, and they came back as a better unit. And that's something you don't see a lot, not just in pro sports, really, in any sports nowadays.
I know we're reminiscing a little bit, but let's think a little bit. Oh, I lost my thought. Give me a second. I got to get this back in. Wow. It was in my head. I didn't write it down, and then it left me. We are reminiscing about 90s basketball, the basketball that was happening at that time. But let's go back into the Bulls. What's one thing – here it is. What's one person that you think would have been interviewed that was not? Or I say that knowing – that I don't know if the general public, those of you listening to this podcast, know about this. There were numerous people. There were people out there that the director, and I've watched a couple interviews with him on the Dan Patrick Show. He had tried for years. He'd been working on this project for 3 to 4 years. And then I know at probably about the year and a half mark, Michael Jordan gave the okay to start working on it. And there are players that were trying to get interviewed that declined. John Stockton was one that said yes. He was only on there for a hot second, but he said, I don't want to be a part of a Michael Jordan puff piece. And they had to ensure them that this was not going to be that. Was there a player? I got 2 things. Just one of them real quickly before we close. Was there a player that you would love to see interviewed or at least speak? Player, commentator, reporter, doesn't really matter. Any person that you wish you could have seen in the docuseries that was not seen?
I'm trying to think back because it's been 10 episodes to make sure they weren't actually interviewed, and I don't remember. I thought which we talked about earlier, that, Michael was not a fan of that Orlando team. I would have loved to heard from Penny Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal, especially in terms of how they played. When Michael Jordan came back from baseball and they had their way in that series, and how Michael said, well, I wasn't 100%. I wasn't fully there. I wasn't, fully in basketball shape. I'd have loved to heard their take on there. I know Patrick Ewing was on there, but he didn't say a lot. And I know he had a lot of mixed feelings about being
He didn't want to be on it.
To Stockton. He didn't want to be there.
Nope.
But I think really I would have loved to hear more from his kids. They were on the very last episode, and that was surprising to me because I didn't know his kids were going to be on there at all. But they had very interesting growing up situations. So while they didn't have a lot to do with the actual on-court play, it would have been fun to hear them talk about their experience some. But I thought one of the things that made this documentary so good was that they did do so many interviews. Even though some felt completely random and out of left field, there was so many different insights and takes. I think that's what made it such a good documentary, Jay, that, it's hard right now to fathom who wasn't in it. I'm sure I'm missing somebody that I would have liked to hear from. Karl Malone, of course, I know why he wasn't in it because he doesn't want to fluff him up, but he's one that I think would be a notable talent, which, as crazy as it is that he wasn't on there talking, it was awesome to see him go on the team bus and congratulate.
That was amazing.
That sort of changed the way I felt about Karl Malone. There's been so many things said about him over the years, but I was like, man, for him to do that, because that's the next level stuff. This is a guy that's been beating you for over and over and over and over for years, and you're still going to go on the team bus. I thought that was pretty cool. But no, I think in terms of a big-time documentary, this was one of the greatest in terms of they got so many people to give their insights. And that that shifts your mind on how you're thinking about, because it'd be one thing if this was a 10-hour Michael Jordan telling us what he thinks, because he's the greatest of all time, but he knows he's the greatest of all time. So it's good to hear other people talk about what he did and what he meant to the game. And some of and one thing I do want to mention, Jay, is there's a lot of people who talk about a Kobe Bryant documentary similar. And I don't think it would come across well because, I don't think, unless they've already started or they've already done most of it, without Kobe being able to sit down and talk about his career like Michael did, it wouldn't have the same effect. And B, so many players were willing to get on there and sort of tell the truth about Michael Jordan and tell you he was a bully. He wasn't always the best teammate in terms of the way he handles certain situations. Sometimes it was a bit distracting that he maybe that he was off gambling or doing whatever. It was hard to play with him at times for the way he was. I don't think a lot of Kobe Bryant teammates would be honest about playing with him now due to the fact that he tragically died. Yeah. And it's just the way it is when a certain event happens like that. And I think that would change the whole documentary. It almost become like, a Kobe Bryant, you said it, a fluff piece where you're making him out to be, the greatest of all time. He is. I'm not saying he's not. But anyone who knows anything about Kobe Bryant or anyone who's ever read Phil Jackson's book knows that Kobe Bryant was hard to deal with, and maybe even harder than anyone ever dealt with Michael Jordan. He was set in his ways. He had that same competitive nature as Michael Jordan. And it's so sad that he died due to just the fact that he died. But in terms of if there's one other athlete, I would love to just get inside their mind the way we just did with Michael Jordan. Kobe Bryant would be at the top of that list because he had that similar mindset, maybe even a bit more so than Michael Jordan, because he had no problem telling his teammates that, look, man, if you're not going to be better than this, I don't want you to play here, and I will make sure you don't play here much longer. Michael Jordan wasn't like that. He wanted to take you under his wing, even if it was, by bullying you a little bit and try to make you better. He wanted to make Scotty Burrell better. I really believe he wanted to make Scotty Burrell a better player. I feel like there was times late in Kobe Bryant's career where he looked at certain players and he goes, you don't have it in you. You can't make it. You don't have that Mamba mentality. You are not going to be great. I'm going to go to Jerry Bus tomorrow or go to Jenny Bus tomorrow, and we're gonna be done with this. This is going to be over. And he done that with players. He done that with Shaquille O'Neal. He done that with Phil Jackson. So I would love, more than anything, to find out more about that whole situation. But after the tragic death, it's just one of those things where, A, not being able to hear Kobe's perspective on all of it just isn't fair. And B, I don't think a lot of players and athletes would be honest. I don't think Shaquille O'Neal would give you his honest opinion on everything that happened in the early 2000s since Kobe tragically died.
Okay, so I'm going to piggyback off of that Patrick Ewing thing that I just said earlier. It's not that Patrick Ewing did not want to be on it. He's one of those players, like you said very, very well. He had to be talked into it because they've had these battles. And if you go back on YouTube and if you watch every single game of these series with the Knicks and the Bulls, or another team, the Knicks and the Pacers, or the Bulls and the Magic, or the Bulls and the Jazz, or the Bulls and the Sonics, you're going to see it was a fight every single day. I watched the Dan Patrick Show before I go to work every single day, about the first 20 minutes, and then I head out of my apartment. So John Stockton, the director, said this. This is not just me hyperbole or me just speaking my opinion. The director said it took them 2 years to get John Stockton to say yes. They didn't interview John Stockton until March the 10th. And it's 2020. So remember now, this is around the time when COVID-19 hit our country, and they had to basically, the director wanted to be there for the interview, but he was unable to be there because of the flight restrictions. So there was somebody already out there in Washington State was actually there to interview Stockton. We saw that Stockton's in an empty gymnasium. I mean, it's a great backdrop for an interview for a basketball documentary, but 2 years. Karl Malone went after Karl Malone for 2 years, even trying to get John Stockton to get him to say yes. But these guys, 20 years later, even Reggie Miller, took him a long time to get there. These guys have such strong emotional feelings still tied to Michael Jordan, and I completely understand. I'm gonna give my personal I wish I could have seen, and then give you my last thing first, and then have you pick it back off of that. So I would have liked to see, you mentioned his kid. I would like to listen to his wife, because she had an insight that not any person was able to actually be able to get. Being his wife. Now, granted, you say, was Michael Jordan married during this time? Yeah, we saw his kids. They even talked about his mom and their feelings and them being in Utah. But yeah, I would love to see his wife. We saw his mom, great insight. Mom birthed him. We all know how the moms love their kids, especially athletes. And mom was there in his life. But I would have loved to see his wife and more family stuff, because we saw them in Space Jam. It's not like we haven't seen them in Michael Jordan's life throughout this time on a public scene, throughout this time during the 90s. But I would have loved to see that, because she would have been able to give a different point of view than any other person could have been able to see. And maybe she could have said Michael was a better person than this docuseries makes him out to be. Now, I do also understand, for those of you that may not know, Michael Jordan has then divorced his first wife. He is now remarried, now has twins with his new wife. So I do understand with Michael Jordan running this, I do understand the emotional ties, the family ties there. I completely understand why his wife was not there. Last but not least, Cody, can go on forever. This has been fun. If I was able to see another docuseries, maybe it's not 10 episodes, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 5, but it's an extended version longer than a 2-part like we're going to see from some 30 for 30s, or a 1-part like a 30 for 30 or an E60. I would love to see a Tiger Woods docuseries, the time when he had the Tiger Slam. Because I think that time in his life, and I believe it was 4 major wins. I forget the time period, the years of that. You may have it at the top of your dome. But I would have loved to see that, because Tiger Woods may be the most iconic, maybe the most polarizing athlete after Michael Jordan that we have ever seen. Say what you want about Kobe. I'm a Kobe guy. Say what you want about LeBron. I have never seen a guy pull an entire race to one sport like Tiger Woods did. I have never seen a guy that did what Tiger Woods did and do it at that level at a time when everybody knows you're trying to get Tiger Woods down. And golfers talk trash, just like basketball players and football players, all that stuff. I would love, now I know it would be a lot. I know Tiger Woods, just like Mike, it would probably take a lot for him to get those emotions into, because he may have some stuff there with his family that he wants no one to know, just like Mike did. I completely understand it. But I would love to have and to see a Tiger Woods docuseries during that time period, because of how special it was, just like the last three-peat, that time with Michael in Chicago. What athlete, and I went first on purpose to give you some time to think about it, what athlete, or maybe even a team, I'll open it up to you, you can have more options than I did. Who would you like to see an extended docuseries on, just like The Last Dance?
Tiger Woods, of course, would be the first one, but if I do Tiger Woods, then he's got to be willing to open up about the bad stuff too. Of course, I want to know about the Tiger Major, but I need to hear about, what happened on Thanksgiving, what happened with the car accident, what happened with the wife and the golf club. I need to know all about that. So if I wanted a Tiger Woods series, I need to know more about that too, not just him being a great golfer. I think I still go back to the Kobe one. I think even with the fact that it couldn't be 100% straightforward, I still think Kobe would be on the top of the list, even if that's just wishful thinking. I think for all the other ones now, if you want me to give you some for the future, if we can jump ahead to 2030, then of course LeBron James will have one of the best ones, as of course, look, Michael Jordan, in my opinion, is the greatest of all time, but there has never been an athlete who is more hyped up, more well-received, more than hated, more than went and won anyway, more than orchestrated changing the sports landscape forever, and then more than never having, which knock on wood, but never having any sort of negative reputation. LeBron James would be at the top of that list. In terms, here's the way I put it, and some people don't like when I say this, but I think it's 100% true. I think Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time. I think LeBron James is the greatest professional athlete of all time in terms of his reputation, in terms of things he does off the floor, in terms of the way he plays basketball, and the way he's changed the game, and the way he done things with the early Cleveland Cavaliers that no one can even imagine. You can go back and look. Some of those Cleveland teams were god-awful terrible, and LeBron James would take them to the Eastern Conference Final and then even to the NBA Finals. Those teams were terrible. I mean, awful. And I mean, to the fact where if he wasn't there, they maybe win 10 games. But he's there and they end up winning 50, 60 games. He changed basketball. And again, there's been so many athletes who have been so big coming out of high school and coming out of college. But people were calling him the next Michael Jordan when he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at 16.
Yes.
If you can start with episode 1 there, episode 5 at the decision, episode 7 and 8, him winning with Miami, and then him going back to Cleveland, wrap it up with him winning in Cleveland, not even to mention what may happen over the next 3 to 5 years of his career. How crazy would it be if he actually gets to play one season with his son? I mean, what a career. And again, I say it all the time, and I believe it wholeheartedly. Who's the greatest basketball player of all time? Michael Jordan. Who's the greatest professional sports athlete of all time? LeBron James. So LeBron's one that I would watch, and I think I would love just as much as the Michael Jordan documentary. In terms of the ones I would watch now, and you mentioned that there's multiple parts, and that's, again, I know I said at the beginning of the podcast, I can watch a documentary about anything, about any athlete. If you want to show me a 2-hour documentary on the career of Gerald Wallace, I'm in, man. I want to watch it. I want to watch it in great detail.
Gerald Wallace, man.
Tell me about him going to Sacramento. Tell me about him being in the expansion draft and about being the Bobcats. I want to know. I will watch a documentary on about
the dunk contest. Hey, let's not forget about it. He can jump too.
Oh yeah, one of the great athletes of the mid 2000s that was underrated. I mean, I will watch it. But you want me to watch 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 episodes? It needs to be stuff where I want to hear from you on what happened. So I will say this coming weekend, I'm super excited about Lance Armstrong because I want to hear if he lies or tells the truth, because that could go in so many different ways. But if I need to pick one right now, I'm going Barry Bonds. I want a sit-down interview with Barry Bonds, and I want it to be very detailed because, they have the Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa documentary coming up, and I'm excited to see that. But it's wild to me that they've put the asterisk next to Barry Bonds' name on a lot of people's lists. They've crossed him out when, in all honesty, he played during an era when everyone was on steroids. And before, when he was this tall, skinny kid, before he really bulked up, he was still one of the most electric and exciting players in baseball. He was right there with Ken Griffey Jr. And then he just changed. He got bigger because everybody was getting bigger. He was in the outfield. He didn't need to be this superb athlete anymore. You can play left field. I mean, there was 275-pound left fielders at the time in baseball. So he thought to himself, well, they want to move me from the 1 spot to the 3 and 4 spot. I'm going to bulk up, become a power hitter. In terms of what he did in Major League Baseball, his whole career, and then the way he's just been so exiled. I mean, so just blacklisted for things that everybody did, for things that, pitchers were doing. And I said this, I think, over the weekend to my dad when we were talking about the Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa documentary, is I can't fathom how, even if you need to take Major League Baseball Hall of Fame and literally add a wing and call it the steroid wing, you should do it. And you should add all these players that made baseball America's pastime. Because look, when you took, some people don't want to hear this. When they took steroids out of baseball, you took about 50% of the fan base with it.
Yes, you did.
It just is not the same. And I think, look, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying people should be do steroids. I'm not saying they should let steroids back in baseball. No, it's a clean sport. That's fine. That's good. But I'm just saying, I think you can't just ignore those years in baseball. If you were a clean player during that era, that's good and dandy. And I understand if you're going to be mad. But look, what notable player from that era, maybe besides Ken Griffey Jr., that don't have a little bit of suspicion to him. So I'd love to have a big, long series with Barry Bonds. He was my favorite baseball player to watch. He played for San Francisco, so those West Coast games are going until 11, 12 o'clock at night. But when he was chasing, 762 home runs, man, I was staying up till 12 o'clock on a school night just hoping he'd hit one in the water. I would stay up late to watch that. It was the most captivating baseball thing to me at the time. Of course, I was always a basketball and football fan first, but, I enjoyed watching the Atlanta Braves play, but there was never a situational thing that pulled me in more than Barry Bonds chasing down the home run king, trying to get those home runs. So I would love to sit down and interview with him. I would love to talk about his early days. I would hope he would open up about steroid use and how that came about, and what he thinks about it. And then just the fact that he's been so exiled, about the fact that, he's kind of now inching back into baseball a little bit, where Major League Baseball will let him back in. I think he might even be like a hitting coach or something now, or something similar. But just the fact that, people don't look at his numbers the way they should, and he's not looked at as an all-time great in many people's eyes. That would be one that I would watch tomorrow. I know a lot of documentaries that I would like to see. Of course, I know probably you agree, New England Patriots will be on there, yep. Tom Brady, Nick Saban's career would be on there. I mean, you could go so many different directions in documentaries we'll all be watching in 10 years. But a Barry Bonds documentary that come out tomorrow, that would captivate me, and I would watch it. I would watch a 10-part series on that if it existed.
Yeah, you mentioned Nick Saban. You can go Urban Meyer. You can go an extensive look at the 0-1 Miami Hurricanes. Now, I understand they did a 30 for 30 on it, but that team was so special. You go now with the 30 for 30 was the whole Hurricanes thing from the 80s till the 2000s, the Larry Coker time. They even after that, because they even talked about how the downfall of the Hurricanes. And I'm one of those fans that love stadiums. I dislike that the Orange Bowl was torn down. I wish that stadium would have kept up, or they would have kept up with it. The upkeep would have been there. Yeah. We can go on and on. And maybe, Cody, the next time we come on, we can just reminisce and talk about different docuseries we would like to see. It's obvious that we both have different ideas and things like that. Cody, very quickly, like 2 seconds, what do you think, or what will be like your lasting impact of the docuseries on your life?
I think getting to learn about the competitiveness of Michael Jordan, that was episode, as good as the whole series was. I don't think that, the end of episode 7 will probably stay with me forever. Him, they'll talk about his father and everything that happened there, and him being strong, and him just saying, I took it as a positive, and I made something of it. But the fact that when asked if it bothered him that he was sometimes perceived as not a nice person because of the way he was with his teammates, the fact that he broke down a bit explaining that, man, I felt that, because that's just something you don't see in sports nowadays. And honestly, either A, you never will again, or a lot of people will see that documentary and go, you know what, I'm done playing around. I'm done being buddy-buddy with everybody, and it's time to change. So, yeah, that'll stay with me forever, man, is that he was so competitive and was so driven to win that it never even really occurred to him until he was doing that interview that some people kind of don't like you because of the way you were. And I think in, Michael's mind, there was two sides of him. There was the competitive side, and then his just everyday, fun-loving, good time side. And I think that got to him, and man, that got to me too. That was one of the most, like, almost in a weird, heart-wrenching way, where you just had to sit there and kind of think for a little bit, like, man, that is the most competitive, driven person maybe of all time. And it was wild to see. But yeah, I mean, that part right there alone will stay with me. And just the cool part of just getting to experience Michael as if I was able to watch in the 90s. Again, I'm 5, 6, 7 years old growing up during this time. So it was awesome to get to sit back and almost feel like I was there, and I was getting to be a teenager watching Michael Jordan play again. That was really cool to me.
Yeah, I think the one last thing that I remember, I think will have a lasting impact on my life. You mentioned the competitiveness, but just being able to, at any point in my life, go back and relive these moments. The Dream Team we talked about, the Pacers series, the Jazz series. Go back and look and see early Mike, even the Dean Smith, the Bob Knight, the Roy Williams, how even early on in Mike's career, people had a feeling he would be great. He was great. He continued that greatness throughout the entirety of his career. You can say whatever you want about Michael Jordan on the Wizards. That man had 40-point games in Washington at 40 years old. He was killing people.
Yeah.
Cody, my man, this is fun. We'll definitely have you back on again. Thank you for coming back on and just reminiscing a little bit about Michael Jordan here on the J. Stevens podcast.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. Anytime. Thanks for having me, Jay.